actually tell the president. If he turned to me and said, I've done everything I can in the diplomatic field, and my only option now is to use nuclear weapons. Of all the decisions that were before me, that was the most haunting one.
Back during the Cold War, we basically had a period, as I view it, of very high risk, but we had stability in one strange paradoxical sense, and that is both sides knew that if there was a war, or if a conventional war became a nuclear war, that the survival of their own nation was at stake. We collectively were diligent in terms of maintaining the weapons, in terms of maintaining security. We were very conscious and sensitive to the great dangers of those weapons in most cases, and we were very good at what we were doing in terms of the professional men and women in the military, indeed on both sides. But we were also very lucky. There were a number of times that I know about, and probably a lot more that I don't know about, where only by the grace of God did we avoid going to war.
It was about 1978 when I was awoken by a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the general who was the watch officer at the North American Air Defense Command. And he told me that his computers were showing 200 missiles on the way from the Soviet Union to the United States. Now that, of course, was a false alarm. The point of that story is that the danger of a nuclear war, the danger of a nuclear holocaust, was not academic to me. That experience in particular brought it very close to my consciousness.
People talk about the concept of deterrence. It worked in an uneasy way during the Cold War when you had two countries mainly. But the more countries you have, the more difficult that concept is.
And if the existing nuclear countries cannot develop some restraints among themselves, in other words, if nothing fundamental changes, then I would expect that a use of nuclear weapons in some 10-year period is very possible.
The world has changed since the end of the Cold War. More countries have nuclear weapons and others are attempting to develop nuclear weapons capabilities. The world needs energy, and that has many countries understandably turning to nuclear power, which, unless safely and securely managed, could also spread sensitive technologies to make the materials essential to a nuclear bomb. The simple fact is, we need new strategies to deal with today's nuclear threats.
If you can learn how to enrich fuel for a nuclear power plant, you've learned how to enrich it for a weapon.
And we have seen already in a country like Pakistan, which is a reasonably well-developed country, that a whole system of proliferation was either possible or tolerated that spread nuclear technology to Libya, North Korea, and some other rogue states.
As nations like Iran and Pakistan, North Korea get nuclear bombs, then the probability increases that one or more of those bombs will fall into the hands of a terror group.
Classical notion of deterrence was that there were some consequences before which aggressors and evildoers would recoil. In a world of suicide bombers, that calculation doesn't operate in any comparable way.
And if you think of the people who are doing suicide attacks, and people like that get a nuclear weapon, they are almost by definition not deterrable. And if you have terrorists get something, then you don't even know the return address. So I think it's a very dangerous moment.
The danger is not simply more nations with nuclear weapons, but that material to make a bomb is scattered around the world. a lot of potential sources for terrorists.
No terror group that we are aware of, even if they're well-financed and well-organized, can build a nuclear weapon from scratch. But if they got the fissile material through another nation, either by buying or stealing it, if they got the right kind of fissile material, then it's not simple to build a nuclear weapon, but it is feasible.
Plans for such a device were found on computers that were part of the AQ Khan smuggling ring, a gang that we know sold nuclear weapons information and equipment to Libya, Iran, North Korea, and possibly other nations or terrorist groups. We don't know who might have those plans. We do know that nuclear technology, closely guarded during the Cold War, has gradually seeped into the global information database. The International Atomic Energy Agency says there have been more than 1,300 nuclear smuggling incidents since 1993, nearly 20 of which have involved the transfer of weapons-usable material. The director of the agency has sounded the alarm, warning that the possibility of terrorists obtaining nuclear or other radioactive material remains a grave threat, and that sometimes material is found that had not been reported missing.
We know several things. We know that the know-how in terms of how to make a crude weapon has exploded over the last 10, 15 years. So the availability of information about the science required to make a weapon is out there now. Not a piece of cake, but doable. The second thing we know is the nuclear material, highly enriched uranium, plutonium is spread all over the world. And without the material, you can't make a weapon. And the third thing we know is the terrorist groups like Alqaeda, but not limited to Alqaeda, are seeking this nuclear material and would like to make a weapon. They've said so, and I believe them.
There are still a lot of bombs, or the material to make them, that terrorists could steal or perhaps buy on the black market. They don't need much. The amount of highly enriched uranium used in the Hiroshima bomb could have fit in a 1-gallon milk jug. Here's what that did.
And of course, I always had in the back of my mind these pictures of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the devastation.
I have been writing about nuclear weapons for over 50 years now. I try to apply traditional diplomatic principles to a world with nuclear weapons. And I found it almost, I would say, impossible to do. So the consequences have to be looked at two levels. One is technically what happens if, say, a 20-kiloton weapon hits downtown New York. And that's a very small weapon.
We're talking probably about 100,000 casualties, economic losses in hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. But beyond that, the political and the social catastrophe is something that we cannot even really imagine today.
Most of the hospitals, most of the medical facilities, most of the powers, most of the bridges, most of the communications would be gone.
We all believed that a terrorist group would claim responsibility and then go on to assert that they had planted bombs in perhaps 5 other cities of the United States and were threatening to set them off unless certain demands were met. And it's almost impossible to contemplate the hysteria and the terror that would set in. You can imagine the people fleeing from the cities. The social and economic structure of the United States collapsing under that.
There's a second level, namely, what do people think happened that permitted such casualties to occur And what will they demand of their government?